Back for a bash ahead of the holidays. More debating among the presidential hopefuls. On This Week in Jacksonville, a local political science professor addressing the Republicans and then the Democrats, getting ready for center stage. Plus, if you want controversial topics in Florida, start with stand your ground or legalizing marijuana.
If they were to try it under existing state law at that time, they would have been branded as criminals. That defied common sense to me.
Senator Rob Bradley discusses two bills coming out of his office as lawmakers gear up for an early legislative session, which is less than a month away in Tallahassee. Thanks for joining us today. We also look at gun laws in California following more frustration and horror after the tragedy in San Bernardino. An attorney specializing in gun laws joins us in a few minutes. First, that terror attack in California has pushed national security to the forefront in the race for president. The Republican candidates are scrambling to establish positions that will impress voters. As a result, they are renewing their criticism of President Obama.
Good evening.
As he spoke about the threat of terrorism facing the United States, even President Obama recognized the implications it could have on the race to replace him.
Even in this political season, even as we properly debate what steps I and future presidents must take to keep our country safe, let's make sure we never forget what makes us exceptional.
The president said more U.S. ground forces would be a mistake. And within seconds of the president finishing his remarks, candidates took to Twitter to react. Donald Trump wrote, "Is that all there is? We need a new president fast." Rand Paul tweeted, "There are answers here to make our nation safe, but once again, the president seems incapable of finding them." Republicans took special exception to the president's call to strengthen gun laws.
He announced nothing new other than we need gun control, even though it would have done nothing to prevent the attack in California.
They argued that he's not taking the threat of radical Islamic terrorism seriously enough.
If this is a war, which I believe it is, then we need to act accordingly. And this president does not believe it's a war. He believes that it's a law enforcement exercise.
And every time they talk about President Obama in a negative light, the next step in the playbook for many candidates appears to tie him back to his former Secretary of State and the likely Democratic presidential nominee, Hillary Clinton.
What President Obama and Hillary and the liberals say is we need to take away the guns of law-abiding citizens.
A carefully executed strategy as Republicans position themselves at a pivotal moment in the race for president. And speaking there of Secretary Clinton, she did not directly respond to the president's speech last week, but in a recent speech, she specifically said the goal must not be to contain ISIS, but to destroy it. And thanks for staying with us. Leslie McKinney joins us, an attorney in Jacksonville at the law office of David Goldman, focusing on gun legislation and litigation. You've been with us before on our program. I appreciate coming back.
Thank you for having me.
Obviously, there's a big topic right now about guns because of the violence we've seen, whether it was something like what happened in Colorado Springs, where somebody's upset about an issue, or a homegrown or domestic terror attack like we saw in San Bernardino. So I want to talk about a couple of those issues and maybe even start with what we heard President Obama talking about a week ago in his speech to the nation about ISIS and terror. Also brought up, hey, we need stronger gun laws. So walk me through some of that, and I guess starting in San Bernardino, how did the gun laws there impact the tragedy that we saw unfold? Is there a connection?
Not surprisingly, they really didn't. California has some of the strictest gun laws in the country. They have full gun registration.
What does full gun registration mean? If I have one, I'm registered, right?
There is a form that has to be filled out and gone to the state. For guns that somehow have fallen through the cracks and haven't had the form filled out, people are encouraged to fill out the form, because if the gun is ever stolen or anything happens to it, they can't get it back without the gun being registered. But even private sales, if I were to sell a gun to you, here in Florida, we could just do it. In California, we have to go to a dealer, do the background check, fill out the registration form. Same at gun shows. If you are moving into the state with handguns or firearms, you're considered a personal weapon importer, and you have to register all your firearms within, I believe, 60 days of residence. So there's a full registry, full background checks, which is actually double the background checks in Florida, because at first they do a state one, and then they do the federal database check. They have strict limitations on the types of firearms and accessories that are allowed. There's about a 90-page law enforcement book that is a picture book of if it looks like this, it's an assault weapon and it's not allowed.
And in that case, if they see that, confiscate it or take it.
Yes. So
there's something that's been going around in terms of stricter gun laws, even something on the pushback against potential terror attacks. Some in Congress are trying to say, let's enforce this no-fly, no-buy rule. So if you're on a no-fly list, you can't buy a gun. What do you think about that?
In theory, it doesn't sound that bad. In reality, to me, it strikes me as a brilliant marketing ploy. It's the terror watch list, which to be put on the list, there's a very low threshold. You could call in right now, give a first or last name, an approximate age, an approximate physical description, and you saw someone doing something suspicious, that's the form that they'll fill out to put you on the watch list. It is...
Nothing has to be verified. I just have to have a complaint against me, and I could be on the no-fly list?
Exactly. And the threshold is very low, and it is filled with errors. Latest estimate is that there's approximately 1.2 million people on this watch list. It would be hard to argue that the government is allowing 1.2 million terrorists to be walking free in the streets. If you attempt to be removed from the list because you were entered onto it in error...
That sounds legitimate. I would want to do that if I was on the list in error.
Exactly. Right. The Attorney General, who's over the Department of Justice, who takes care of this list, does not have to show the reason why you were put on it or tell you why you were put on it. If you go to court, the judge can demand to see it in his chambers away from you, but isn't allowed to consider it when he's determining if you're going to be removed from the list. So far, we've only been able to find one person entered onto the list in error who has been successfully able to legally challenge it and be removed.
So it's not a matter of you're saying, hey, the idea of doing something to keep guns out of the hands of potential terrorists, you're not saying that's a bad idea. Just doesn't sound like this no-fly list would pass your test on being effective.
Correct. We're essentially stripping someone of a constitutional right based on conjecture, no need to prove it, no due process, and they can't fix it when it's wrong.
I want to bring up one of your colleagues, somebody else, a local attorney who's been on our show as well. Cord Bird is a gun rights lawyer, if you will, and sent us a statement here earlier this week. In his address, the president asked the following question: what could possibly be the argument for allowing a terrorist suspect to buy a semi-automatic weapon? Well, Mr. President, the answer to your question is the Constitution. Mr. Bird goes on to say that the government should not take away constitutional rights of people who are suspected of crime. If the government believes that it can establish probable cause for an arrest and then establish evidence beyond a reasonable doubt to convict, then it should do just that. That sounds a little bit like what you're saying here in terms of no-fly list being the reason somebody couldn't buy a weapon.
Exactly. I agree with what Cord said. I know him well. The question really...
We've got about 30 seconds left.
The question really becomes, what other constitutional right would you be willing to strip from the American people based on such low of a threshold? How low can the standard go that we're willing to accept it for any other fundamental right?
You know, a lot of discussion here. Our first guest today was talking about this is going to be something we're hearing about in the presidential campaigns as well. And appreciate hearing another voice from you today. Leslie McKinney, thanks.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for joining us this morning. This Week in Jacksonville airs each Sunday morning at this time. You know, JTA just launched the First Coast Flyer. Their CEO has won awards presented at the White House. So, Nat Ford joins us next week. I hope you'll join us. In the meantime, I'm Kent Justice. Thanks for watching on air and online at newsforjax.com.